Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 993 for February 27th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
It's people I never would have met otherwise, and I feel like I have so many new friends that regardless of whiskey, I would be hanging out with them anyway. You know, it's just I enjoy their company, I enjoy hanging out with them, and there's something special about whiskey and how it brings, it creates new communities and brings people together that you otherwise may never have come across.
There are literally hundreds of whiskey clubs around the world, from those with a handful of members to those with hundreds of members. Why form a whiskey club, and how do you build a successful one? We'll talk with several whiskey club leaders on this week's WhiskyCast in depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, and on Behind the Label.
This word kept popping up, and we never quite had an explanation for what it was, and we asked a few people, and we didn't ask the right people, but no one seemed to know. Eventually we found this recipe from 1828.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarella here again with Dewar's Scotch Whiskey, and I have to say, Dewar's French Cask Smooth is a double-aged masterpiece, finished in apple brandy cask from Normandy to be unlike anything you've tried before. More in a bit.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Friday marked the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now Russia is fighting the trade sanctions imposed by many Western countries in the wake of that invasion. Diageo, Edrington, and other drinks companies have pulled out of Russia because of the sanctions, but the Russian government has authorized so-called gray market imports of goods no longer available because of the sanctions. Russian media outlets report at least two groups have registered plans to import Johnnie Walker, Macallan, Jack Daniels, and other whiskeys into Russia without the consent of the brand's owners. The move would involve buying up stocks of those whiskeys in countries that still trade with Russia and then shipping them to Russia. For years, Latvia has been a known transshipment point for whiskey exports to Russia and routinely showed up in the annual list of top 10 Scotch whiskey export markets. The Latvians did not make the list in 2022, and the Russian embargo led to an 18% drop in whiskey exports to Eastern Europe during 2022. Scotland's controversial bottle return scheme program is set to take effect in August, but now there's word that the UK government may block the program. The Herald reports that ministers in London may refuse permission for a trading exemption for cans and bottles from outside of Scotland, and that could kill the program. Unless it's blocked, consumers would pay a 20p deposit on drinks that come in single-use containers, then get a refund when they recycle the container, with drinks producers covering the cost of that deposit. The program has been attacked by drinks companies, both small and large, and all three SNP candidates to succeed party leader and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon have indicated support for delaying the launch. Edrington faces the potential of a strike as early as April at the Macallan distillery and its main facility in Glasgow. GMB Scotland plans a strike vote starting Wednesday and running through March 22nd after the union and Edrington failed to reach an agreement on new bonus pay for working so-called unsociable hours, namely evenings and weekends. The two sides have been negotiating for months, and the union filed notice of a strike vote last week after mediation attempts failed. More than 300 workers could go on strike if the vote is approved. Campari is shopping for another acquisition after its Wilderness Trail deal, with an eye to expanding its share of the U.S. spirits market. CEO Bob Kunze-Concevich told the Wall Street Journal his executives have been gearing up for a big deal for some time now. The company currently holds a 2.5% market share in the U.S., largely on sales of wild turkey, which grew by 21% last year and make up 8% of Campari's global sales. The company also plans significant capital spending over the next 2 years at Wild Turkey, along with its aperitif and tequila production plants. In other news this week, Shakespeare's Macbeth is one of the classics of literature, and now a new whiskey collection is celebrating the characters of Macbeth. It's a collaboration between Livingstone's Lexi Burgess, illustrators Sir Quentin Blake, Dave Broom, and the team at Elixir Distillers. Elixir's Oliver Chilton explains how the 42-bottle collection came about.
Essentially, Lexi became quite obsessed with the idea that the whiskey industry was much the same in terms of history as the play Macbeth. And he managed to get the trademark for Macbeth. And then he's been representing, as part of his Burgess Studios work, he represents Quentin Blake. So he went to Quentin and he said, look, I've got this idea for a range of whiskies where I do every whiskey will be different and it'll be a different character. And I think Quentin originally said no. And then he said, well, you could draw all the characters as birds. And apparently Quentin went, oh, actually, I quite like that. And the next day delivered all of the drawings, like you do. And that was years ago. I think that was probably about 5 years ago. And then he spoke to Dave Broom. Dave wrote all of the characters, which were absolutely incredible. So Dave has, from my side, what he's done is not only done the tasting notes and on the back of the labels, but he went for every character in Macbeth. He watched every single adaptation of Macbeth, reread the play many, many, many times. And then each character he wrote as a whiskey. So he wrote what they would have, like he defined their flavour out of their character. And then through some mutual friends, Lexi was introduced to myself and Sukhinder as people who could help him put the whiskies together. So we've been working on this now. Yeah, I think it's probably close to 4 or 5 years, which seems kind of mad, really. But it's been probably the most interesting whiskey project we've had outside of building distilleries.
The first series of releases, known as Act 1, range from King Duncan, a 56-year-old Glen Grant priced at £10,000 a bottle, to The Bloody Sergeant, a 10-year-old Blair Athol that will sell for £95. They'll be available in the UK through the Whisky Exchange and Livingstone, along with retailers in France, Canada, Taiwan, Japan, and other selected global markets. Irish Distillers has released the 2023 edition of Middleton Very Rare. Master distiller Kevin O'Gorman selected a slightly higher percentage of pot still whiskies for this year's blend, while also increasing the lighter whiskies in the blend to add more citrusy character. It'll be available in the U.S., Canada, Europe, Australia, Asia, and in global travel retail, with a price tag of $250 each. There is also a special one-off edition this year. The Middleton Very Rare Pinnacle Vintage is a single bottle blended from each of the 40 annual Middleton Very Rare expressions. It also has some single pot still whiskey distilled in 1984 by master distiller Barry Crockett, who created the range. It's available through blockbar.com at a price tag of $130,000. And speaking of single pot still, Writer's Tears is bringing its single pot still edition to the U.S. market for the first time. It's finished in a combination of Pedro Jimenez sherry casks and Florio Marsala wine casks, and will be available in 15 U.S. states at a price of $79.99 each. Tobermory has released the third edition in its Hebridean series. It's a 25-year-old single malt that started out as the Tobermory 15-year-old before it was re-racked into Gonzales Bias sherry casks for an additional 10 years. The whiskey is available exclusively at Berry Brothers and Rudd through March 8th at £345 a bottle, and will go on sale through the Tobermory website on that date. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
I'd like to pause this episode for just a minute or two to share something personal with you. Each week we talk about cask strength conversation, and we do our best to get you relevant news, interviews, tasting notes on new releases, and information that will help you grow your passion for whiskey. But those conversations are a little one-sided, so we thought we'd fix that. We'd like you to join the conversation and share your whiskey journey with us in our new free mobile app available now in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. All you have to do is search for WhiskyCast Community. This is personal to me because we are closing in on our 1,000th episode, and as an independent weekly podcast, that's an achievement worth celebrating. And we would like to do that by elevating whiskey discussion and connecting with listeners like you, whether you've been listening since the beginning or just discovered the podcast. So, here's what we've done. We have designed the framework for a collaborative community, but what it becomes is up to all of us, the whiskey enthusiasts, whiskey makers, and even other whiskey media who participate in this space. We've got an ever-expanding menu of whiskey content and great whiskey conversation that's free to download and use. And it's all in service of our mission to share the story of whiskey. Now, my question for you is, what's your whiskey story? Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Tickets are still available for Big Smoke meets Whiskey Fest in Hollywood, Florida, Saturday. This weekend also brings us the Fife Whiskey Festival in Scotland, the Southeast Whiskey Festival in Wexford, Ireland, Whiskey Birmingham in England, and Dramfest 2023 in Christchurch, New Zealand. Whiskey and Barrel Night New York is on March 9th, and Viking Cruises' annual Cinderella Whiskey Fair takes place from the 9th through the 11th, leaving from Stockholm, Sweden. The Trondheim Whiskey Festival is March 11th in Norway, and the Whiskey Show is that same day in Hobart, Australia. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast Community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. We all know that whiskey is best when it's shared with friends, and whiskey clubs are becoming more and more popular. But how do you form a whiskey club? We're going to stay away from the huge clubs with hundreds of members and focus instead this week on smaller clubs. For instance, the Texas Whiskey Association and Tasting Society in Sulphur Springs, Texas. Martin Fielder founded the group.
So I thought, there's no way in the world I'm ever going to drink all this whiskey by myself. So I need to find some whiskey friends. And not many of my friends were into whiskey so much. And so I thought, well, why don't I just introduce them to it? And why don't I start my own club? There's not a club in my community. So I figured that I would be the one to start on that journey.
The Society has 25 members that meet in Fielder's home once a month to learn more about whiskey.
They're mostly whiskey novices. There's a couple that have some good foundation background in whiskey. But so mostly it's been educational. I've been, we'll have a topic. So we'll do like Scotch or bourbon, rye, something like that. And I'll provide some bottles and we'll go through tasting and I'll kind of talk about some various themes. You know, if it's Scotch, I'll go over the various regions, what's the space side, what's the Highland, and kind of the general ideas behind that and the history of the whiskey and the whiskey making in Scotland. And we kind of go from there. And we always end with a little, we call it a whiskey battle. We'll do a blind, 1 versus 1. and see which one you like. And then the winner moves on in a kind of like a March Madness type format. And then eventually we're going to do it a year at a time. By the end of the year, then we'll have a champion of that year.
The Dead Liver Society in Massachusetts came about via social media. Elias Aoud is one of the founders and credits Reddit with bringing the club together.
There's various whiskey subreddits, so let's say one for Scotch, one for bourbon, one for world whiskeys, so on and so forth. And what happened probably 7 or 8 years ago, people started founding smaller subreddits for folks within their communities, so kind of like regional whiskey subreddits. One of those was the New England Whiskey subreddit, and at one point we decided, some of us should try and meet up and do a bottle share and just hang out and actually get to know each other, put faces, put names to faces, so on and so forth. And so we had our first meetup. It was just 3 of us the first time, but we did it again and again, and each time more people showed up, and we ended up with probably like 12 to 15 people that at one point were showing up every single time. So we had a nice little kind of close-knit group. So from there, we started our own small group chat via Facebook Messenger, and then we would goof around. Initially, we called it just New England Whiskey Group because that's what it was, and then people would change the name every month or two. One time, somebody changed it to Dead Liver Society as a joke, and we kind of just stuck with that.
Aline Wagner's Redhead Whiskey Club has 2 chapters with a combined total of 190 members.
It's all exploded very, very quickly in the past year. And I would take you to 2 points in the past to kind of explain how it happened. I started drinking with my whiskey with my dad, and he taught me how to drink whiskey. And we'd usually drink Macallan, and then he passed. And I would drink whiskey just to kind of remember, our connection. And then after a year or 2, someone took me to a Lefroy tasting, and I was expecting a Macallan. But it was Lefroy, and I was so amazed by the flavors that it opened a door in my mind. And then 5 years later, COVID, I had a little bit more free time, and I found myself going to different liquor stores and picking up food and going to friends, to hang out at home. And then I realized that I have a lot of friends that like whiskey. And it's an expensive business. And if you want to try different things that you want to share. So I thought, why not open a chat group together and we can all, share, pitch in. So I thought we'd be 7, 10 people. And I opened it on WhatsApp, a group on WhatsApp. And I started adding friends, and, people were adding their friends and their friends. And instead of 7 to 10 people, we were all of a sudden 50. So what I did next was to say, okay, so it's not just about sitting around a table and just sharing a bottle anymore. This is something different. And it took me back to the Lefroy experience. And it was like, maybe I can find someone like Simon to come over and talk to us about it. So I started posting on Facebook groups and trying to find people to come and take us through the tastings. And that just opened a huge door for me. First thing was that I was introduced to many people that, the brand ambassadors, the reps, everyone that can come in and talk about their brand, to experts that are they enjoy talking about it. But it also introduced me to 2 mentors in the world, one here in the US and one in Israel. And they kind of guided me through how to structure, how to build a program. What do we start talking about? Do we talk about casks? Do we deep dive into a brand? So I started developing a program for us to meet every 8 to 6 weeks and enjoy it together.
It's not hard to create a whiskey club. All 3 of our club founders suggest starting small, perhaps a few friends around the dinner table.
I think step 1 is just commit to doing it. I'd probably start small. Grab some friends, some people that you know, and kind of start it that way and get your feet wet. I don't know that I would just put out an open invitation on Facebook and have 100 people show up to your front door or, bar or restaurant or wherever you sign it up. I'd probably would say start small and build from there. And I think you'll be able to grow it in the way that you want to.
People try to do too much from what I've seen and looking at what some other clubs do. And, be inclusive. Don't, we're open. We don't care. Our group is made up of people in their 20s up to their mid 60s. All genders, all backgrounds. It's a community. It's for the love of whiskey.
If you grow beyond what the dinner table or living room can hold, you're going to have to find a place to hold meetings. And here's where it can become tricky. Depending on where you are, liquor licensing laws may not allow you to bring your own bottles to share at a club meeting. That puts you at the mercy of what the bar or restaurant has on hand. It's a problem that Elias Aoud's club is going through right now.
With the Dead Liver Society, there's a restaurant that has a BYO license. Or I should say they used to have a BYO license. So we used to meet there, and essentially, we'd all bring our own bottles because of the licensing, and then we'd just order food from them and hang out for a bit. But even then, it's a smaller restaurant. So, if we wanted to get 20 people together, it probably wouldn't work there. We'd be taking over a third of the restaurant, and we'd feel bad doing that. So it's one of those situations where, okay, once you go over a certain point, you need to find a new venue, or you need to start meeting at someone's house, and then you have to find somebody who can host, 20 plus people at their home, which is some people can, but not a lot of people are able to do that. And so there's certain situations there. And then the restaurant we used to use actually just got a liquor license, an on-premise liquor license in January, so we can't even use that as a meeting spot anymore. So now for Dead Liver Society, we're trying to figure out how do we move forward, because we do want to keep meeting, but we need a new meeting spot.
But even with growing pains, there are benefits to being part of a whiskey club. Elaine Wagner says it changed her life.
Whiskey is a one-of-a-kind glue that brings people together in a way that nothing else does. It has a story. It has, about the distilleries, the process, what it means, everything around it, the terroir, the geography, the politics, the gossip, all of that. It has the social aspect of sitting with other people and connecting. And it has obviously the sensual aspect of smelling and tasting and feeling the whiskey. So that's what I've learned. And as soon as I started bringing in different experts and different ambassadors, I just got into this world more and more. And I've just completed my bourbon professional certificate, and I'm on my way to get the Scotch one, because there's so much to explore. It's never ending. It's never ending. We always have different people talk about the same thing, and it's never boring. It's always different. There's no other thing like that to me.
Thanks to Elaine Wagner, Martin Fielder, and Elias Aoud for sharing their club's stories with us on this week's WhiskyCast In Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com.
Gabriel here again. Dewar's Master Blender Stephanie McLeod has been doing some amazing things with cask finishing lately, and Dewar's French Cask Smooth is no exception. It's the 5th edition to the Dewar's Cask Finishing Series. This 8-year whiskey is double-aged, then finished in Calvados casks to blend together the best of Scottish distilling and aging with the finest in French brandy maturation. The nose is sweet honey and citrus in perfect balance. Taste it, and you'll get this unmistakable note of baked apple, citrus, and a hint of cinnamon spice. Now, I recommend it this time of year as an apple cinnamon highball, using lemon juice, simple syrup, unfiltered apple juice, and club soda, or simply enjoy it on its own. Either way, it's a specially crafted reward for your curiosity.
The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the 2007 Strathisla from the Whiskey Exchange. It's bottled at 60.3% ABV, and the nose is malty and dusty with a hint of dried flowers. The taste is peppery with a nice touch of citrus and notes of barley sugar, dried flowers, and anise. The finish is long and tongue-tingling with lingering spice and citrusy tartness. I'm scoring the Whiskey Exchange's 2007 Strathyla single cask a 92. Next up, the Oban 10-year-old from the Diageo 2022 Special Releases series. This one is bottled at 57.1% ABV, and the nose has a touch of maltiness along with toasted bread, honey, and a subtle kiss of smoke. The taste has a nice balance of lemon pepper spice, grapefruit, grilled pineapple, honey, vanilla, and a soft smokiness. The finish is long with lingering lemon pepper spice and citrus, and I'm scoring the Oban 10-year-old 2022 release a 92. Finally, let's look at the Octomore 10-year-old 5th edition from Bruichladdich. It's bottled at 56.3% ABV, and the nose has peat smoke balanced by dried fruits, heather, honey, and a touch of apples. The taste is peaty and phenolic with touches of peppercorns, dried fruits, honey, and vanilla. The finish, very long and smoky with a nice touch of dried fruits and honey. I'm scoring the Octomore 10-year-old 5th edition a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, double oak, cask strength, or reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails, at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. We've seen a number of whiskeys made recently by distilling fully brewed beer, hops and all, but it turns out that hops were part of early distilling in Scotch whiskey. Arthur Motley and Dave Broom produced the Liquid Antiquarian online video series, and they discovered recently an 1828 recipe that calls for bub as part of the process. Now, what is bub? Arthur Motley explains.
Bub was a term that I'd noticed in old excise records and referred to as something quite important. Because obviously it was measured, it was only able to be used in controlled circumstances, and it seemed to be part of the whiskey making process in the 19th century. And we didn't know. Me and Dave, as part of our research for Liquid Antiquarian, kept popping up this word kept popping up, and we never quite had an explanation for what it was, and we asked a few people, and we didn't ask the right people, but no one seemed to know. Eventually, we found this recipe from 1828 from an exciseman based in Elgin called John MacDonald, and it was in a guide for good practice for distillers. So he was someone who had worked in a number of distilleries up in Elgin and was clearly respected. And to our surprise, this liquid, bub, which was made effectively by boiling wort and condensing wort, but it was boiled with large quantities of hops. And this really surprised me and Dave. And instantly we thought, I wonder what bubbed whiskey tastes like with hops. And of course, it's so intriguing because hops is not a permitted or are not a permitted ingredient in whiskey production today. So it really surprised us. And this is, of course, 1828. So shortly after the 1823 Excise Act, this is the very birth of commercial single malt whiskey production. And we tell ourselves lots of stories about what whiskey was like then and how it's exactly the same as it is today. And this seemed very, very different.
So you worked with Holyrood Distillery to actually make some bubbed spirit, right?
Yeah. Well, I went across to see Nick and Mark, the distiller there, and pushed across this recipe across the table. And I said, I don't suppose you would be interested in letting us work with you and make this unusual spirit. And not only that, but we actually did two complete runs. So we did one using this bub to make a bubbed spirit, including the hops, and then another full run as a control. And that control was interesting in itself because we tried to keep all the parameters the same. But in this control spirit, we also tried to make it in as many other ways that was described in this exciseman's guide. So using the correct yeast, using an old strain of barley, and then following the other processes and timings as they were described in McDonald's exciseman's guide. So we had two side-by-side spirits, as similar as we could make them, made in the old-fashioned way as described in this book, but then one of them had a quantity of bub put in there as well, to the correct ratios.
So what does it taste like?
Different, but not wildly different. We were kind of concerned that we had two concerns. One was that it wouldn't have an effect and that the bub wouldn't have an effect and both spirits would taste broadly the same. That would have meant the whole project was a complete waste of time, Mark. But thankfully they tasted different. Both were really good spirits. But the one with the bub element in it had this kind of slightly herbaceousness to it, this zinginess to it, not bitterness as such. It wasn't like some of those hot spirits that you maybe have tried before, like effectively distilled IPAs, which I've never found favour with. It's not like that. So it's not wildly not like you make spirit, but there's definitely something different about it. Dave described it as something kind of electric on the palate. And it's really good. It's really, really good.
Are you aging some of this now? I know that they're selling it through Royal Mile Whiskies, but did you hold some back to mature it to see what happens?
Yes. Yes. I haven't. I'm not actually sure if it's gone into wood yet. But Dave and I are each getting a cask, one of the control and one of the bubbed spirit, and we're going to effectively make sure we each get some of the bottles from each. And then Holyrood are going to mature some on themselves.
Where did you guys find this recipe? Where did you guys find this exciseman's guide? In Charlie McLean's house, believe it or not. I was up having a dram at Charlie's house, and I know I'd asked him at least twice if he knew what bub was, and he replied no. And then I happened to find this slim volume on his shelf of this very intriguing little book that, incidentally, I'd not seen referred to in any bibliography. I've never seen this book referred to anywhere. It must be very, very rare. I think it was privately published in Elgin in 1828. And there it was on Charlie's shelf. And I flicked through this amazing book, and there was this exact recipe with quantities, with methods of application, everything we needed. The new make bubbed and unbubbed spirits are available for sale through Royal Mile Whiskies. Of course, they're labeled as spirit drinks because of the use of bub, as well as the 3-year age requirement, even though one could now make an argument that using bub might qualify as traditional use under the current Scotch whisky law. Thanks to Arthur Motley for the explanation, and if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the new WhiskyCast Community app. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, people always ask me, does Redbreast go better with ice or without? Would it go well with figs? dark chocolate, apple crumble. Is there one particular thing I should enjoy it with? I tell them, yeah, other people.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Friends, it's me again, reminding you to try Dewar's French Cask Smooth Blended Scotch Whiskey. The best of two cultures and traditions in one beautiful bottle. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.